My husband said we were broke while secretly buying his affair partner a car. For 2 years, my husband kept telling me we were broke. Not struggling, not budgeting, broke. According to him, every extra dollar mattered. Every expense needed approval. Every purchase had to be justified. Meanwhile, I had no idea he was secretly buying another woman a car. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 8 years. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Or at least we used to be. Things changed around 2 years ago. Suddenly, Daniel became obsessed with money. He constantly talked about cutting costs, canceling subscriptions, skipping vacations, postponing home repairs. At first, I thought he was simply being responsible. The economy wasn't exactly predictable. But eventually, it became extreme. When our refrigerator broke, Daniel insisted we repair it instead of replacing it. When my laptop died, he said we couldn't afford a new one. When I suggested a weekend trip for our anniversary, he laughed and said, "With what money?" Meanwhile, he kept assuring me everything would improve eventually. We just needed to be patient, so I trusted him, because that's what spouses do. At least that's what I thought. The first crack appeared during a neighborhood barbecue. I was chatting with another woman when she casually mentioned Daniel's promotion. I smiled politely, then froze. Promotion? What promotion? Apparently, Daniel received a major promotion nearly 8 months earlier. A promotion that came with a significant raise. Interesting. Because according to Daniel, finances had been getting worse, not better. When I confronted him later, he brushed it off. The raise wasn't that large. Taxes reduced most of it, benefits changed, excuses, lots of excuses, none of them made sense. But I let it go for the moment. Then came twist number one. A few weeks later, I was organizing paperwork when I noticed something strange. A monthly payment leaving one of our accounts. Not huge, but consistent, every month. The description wasn't helpful, just an account number. When I asked Daniel about it, he immediately became defensive. His explanation, business expenses, that was odd because Daniel wasn't self-employed. The explanation felt wrong, very wrong, so I started paying closer attention. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop finding things, small withdrawals, unusual transfers. Charges I couldn't explain, nothing dramatic individually. But together they painted an ugly picture. Money was going somewhere. A lot of money. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was meeting a friend for lunch when I saw Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be there. In fact, he told me he was attending a work conference across town. Yet there he was, standing in a dealership parking lot, beside a woman I had never seen before. At first I assumed they were coworkers. Then I watched Daniel hand her a set of keys. The woman hugged him. Not a friendly hug, not a professional hug. The kind of hug that instantly tells you something is wrong. My stomach dropped. I sat frozen in my car, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. There wasn't. The next few days were torture. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, curiosity won. I hired a private investigator. Honestly, I expected bad news. I didn't expect disaster. Within 2 weeks, the investigator confirmed Daniel had been seeing another woman. Her name was Melissa. They'd known each other for over a year. The relationship appeared serious, very serious. Then came the car. The vehicle wasn't leased. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't temporary. Daniel purchased it. For her, using money he repeatedly claimed didn't exist. I felt physically sick. But then something strange happened. The investigator looked confused. Confused wasn't the reaction I expected. When I asked why, he showed me another report. According to his findings, Melissa didn't behave like a typical affair partner. In fact, several witnesses reported frequent arguments between her and Daniel. Public arguments. Loud arguments, arguments about money. That detail stuck with me. If Daniel was secretly spoiling her, why were they constantly fighting? The answer arrived sooner than expected. One evening, Daniel forgot his tablet at home. Notification appeared on the screen. Melissa, I shouldn't have looked. But after everything I'd learned, I wasn't exactly concerned about etiquette. The message read, "You promised you'd tell her before this got worse." Reread the sentence 3 times. Tell me what? Suddenly, the affair looked different, messier, more complicated. The next morning, I began digging deeper. And that's when I found something much worse than the affair. A second bank account. One I didn't know existed. The balance nearly made me drop my phone. Because while Daniel spent 2 years convincing me we were broke, he had secretly accumulated almost $90,000. Not hidden from strangers, hidden from his wife. The betrayal was bad enough. Then I examined the transactions. And that's when the story took another turn. Because Melissa wasn't receiving most of the money, someone else was. A name I didn't recognize appeared repeatedly, large transfers, month after month, thousands of dollars, far more than the car payments. Far more than gifts, far more than anything connected to the affair. Suddenly, Melissa looked less like the main secret, and more like a distraction. The real mystery was this unknown person. Who were they? Why was Daniel sending them money? And why was he willing to destroy our marriage to keep it hidden? A week later, I got my answer, and it changed everything. Because the mystery person wasn't a girlfriend, wasn't a business partner, wasn't even a friend. The mystery person was connected to Daniel's past. A past he claimed no longer mattered. A past he'd spent years hiding from me. And once I discovered the truth, the affair became the least shocking part of the entire story. That's when I realized I didn't actually know the man I'd been married to for 8 years. Not even close. For almost an entire week, I obsessed over that mystery name. Every time I thought about confronting Daniel, another question stopped me. Because at that point, I already knew about the affair. I already knew about the car. I already knew about the hidden account, but somehow the unknown recipient bothered me more than all of it. The transfers weren't random. They were scheduled, predictable, consistent, almost like Daniel was supporting someone. The question was who and why. Eventually, I got my answer from a source I never expected, Daniel's sister. My sister-in-law, Rebecca. Now, Rebecca and Daniel weren't particularly close. Family gatherings usually ended with them arguing about something. So when she called asking to meet privately, I was immediately suspicious. The moment she sat down, she looked nervous, really nervous. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Much do you actually know?" Never a good way to start a conversation. I told her everything, the affair, the car, the hidden money, the secret account, the mystery recipient. By the time I finished, Rebecca looked shocked, not because of the affair, because of the hidden account. Apparently that part was new information even to her. Then she revealed something that completely changed the story. The mystery recipient wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel's former stepbrother, a man named Chris. I blinked. I had never heard that name before, not once in 8 years. According to Rebecca, years before I met Daniel, their family went through a messy divorce, relationships fractured. People stopped speaking, everyone moved on, or at least that was the public version of events. Privately, things were different. Daniel never completely cut ties with Chris. In fact, they stayed in contact for years. Then came twist number 2. Chris wasn't receiving financial support. Daniel owed him money, a lot of money. And suddenly the monthly transfers made more sense, but not enough. Why would Daniel owe thousands of dollars to someone he'd barely mentioned? Rebecca didn't know. Or at least she claimed she didn't. But she did know one thing. Years ago, something happened between Daniel and Chris. Something serious. Serious enough that their relationship never fully recovered. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The affair no longer felt like the center of the story. It felt like a symptom, a distraction from something bigger. Then fate handed me another clue. While reviewing older documents from the hidden account, I found a payment reference. A legal case number, just one, buried among hundreds of transactions. I searched it online and immediately wished I hadn't, because the case involved Daniel. The filing was nearly 10 years old, long before we met, long before our marriage, long before any of this. The details were limited. But one thing stood out. Chris was listed as a witness, not a business partner, not a plaintiff, a witness. Whatever happened back then, Chris knew something important, something connected to Daniel. And suddenly the secret payments looked a lot less voluntary. The next few days felt surreal. Every answer uncovered another mystery. Then came the biggest twist yet. The private investigator called me. Apparently he'd continued looking into Melissa after delivering his original report, and he discovered something strange. Melissa wasn't receiving expensive gifts anymore. In fact, she'd recently been trying to distance herself from Daniel. That made no sense. People don't usually walk away from someone secretly buying them cars, unless they know something. The investigator managed to obtain messages exchanged between them. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but one message stood out. Melissa wrote, "Tired of being blamed for things that started before I even met you." I read that sentence at least 20 times, because it confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. Melissa wasn't the cause of the disaster. She had simply stepped into an already existing one. Then another surprise arrived. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone rang repeatedly. The caller ID displayed Chris over and over, 5 missed calls in less than 10 minutes, then a text appeared, one sentence. She's asking questions. Tell her the truth before I do. My heart started racing. Now I knew two things. First, Chris knew I was investigating. Second, whatever secret Daniel was hiding was still active, still dangerous, still unresolved. The following morning, I made a decision. I contacted Chris directly. Honestly, I expected him to ignore me. Instead, he agreed to meet almost immediately. That should have been my first warning. People carrying major secrets don't usually agree that quickly. When we met, Chris looked exhausted, not angry, not hostile, exhausted, like someone who had spent years carrying a burden he never wanted. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, my entire understanding of Daniel changed. Because according to Chris, the affair wasn't the biggest betrayal. The hidden money wasn't the biggest betrayal. The biggest betrayal was that Daniel had built our marriage on a lie. Not one lie, many, some small, some enormous. And one particular secret connected everything together: the debt, the hidden account, the payments, the affair, even the car, everything. I asked Chris what the secret was. He stared at me for several seconds, then slowly slid a folder across the table. I opened it. Inside was a photograph, an old photograph. At first it looked ordinary, then I recognized Daniel. Standing beside him was Chris, and standing between them was someone else, someone I had never seen before, a woman. I looked up. Who is she? Chris took a deep breath, then answered. And the moment he said her name, I understood why everyone had been hiding the truth. Because that woman wasn't just connected to Daniel's past. She was connected to his present. And somehow she was connected to me too. At that moment, I realized the affair, the car, and the secret money were only the surface of the story. The real secret had been buried for nearly a decade. And if Chris was telling the truth, everything in my marriage was about to change. I stared at the photograph. The woman looked familiar, not in the way you recognize a celebrity. More like seeing someone from a dream you can't quite place. The longer I looked, the more frustrated I became. Then Chris finally broke the silence. Her name is Hannah. The name meant absolutely nothing to me, at least at first. Then Chris said something that made my stomach drop. Daniel was engaged to her. I blinked. What? According to Chris, years before I met Daniel, he had been planning a wedding with Hannah, a serious relationship, a shared future, the whole thing. Then everything fell apart. That alone wasn't shocking. People have past relationships. People get engaged and break up, life happens, but Chris wasn't finished. Because apparently the breakup wasn't normal. It ended in a legal dispute, a financial dispute, and a fallout that affected multiple people, including Chris, including Daniel. And apparently, years later, including me. At that point, I felt like every answer came attached to 3 new questions, so I asked the obvious one. What does this have to do with Melissa? Chris sighed. Then rubbed his forehead. Because apparently even he was tired of how complicated the story had become. According to him, absolutely nothing. Melissa wasn't connected to Hannah. Melissa wasn't connected to the old dispute. Melissa wasn't connected to the hidden debt. The affair was real, but it was separate. An entirely different bad decision layered on top of several older ones. Honestly, that somehow made everything worse. Because now Daniel wasn't hiding one disaster. He was hiding multiple disasters at the same time. Then Chris handed me another document, and this one changed everything. It was a settlement agreement, years old, signed by Daniel, signed by Hannah. The details weren't dramatic. No shocking scandal, no criminal activity, just a financial obligation Daniel had agreed to years earlier. An obligation he apparently never fully completed. Instead of resolving it, he'd been making sporadic payments, then hiding those payments from everyone, including me. Suddenly the mystery transfers finally made sense, at least partially. But one question still bothered me. Why keep it secret? Why not simply tell? Couples discuss finances all the time. Chris answered before I could ask, because Daniel had already told a different story. Years ago, when we started dating, Daniel claimed the entire situation was resolved, finished, closed, done. The moment he admitted otherwise, every previous lie would collapse, so he kept lying, year after year, one lie protecting another, then another, then another, until eventually he couldn't tell where the truth ended. And that's when everything finally clicked: the affair, the hidden account, the secret payments, the constant claims that we were broke. Daniel wasn't managing money, he was managing secrets. And those secrets were expensive, very expensive. When I got home that night, Daniel immediately knew something had changed. Maybe it was my expression, maybe it was the way I walked through the door. Whatever it was, he knew. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then he finally asked, "You met with Chris, didn't you?" I didn't bother denying it. There was no point. The conversation that followed lasted almost 5 hours. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel stopped pretending. No excuses. No clever explanations. No attempts to redirect blame. Just honesty, painfully late honesty. According to him, Hannah wasn't the problem. The settlement wasn't the problem. The hidden payments weren't even the problem. The real problem was pride. He couldn't admit mistakes, couldn't admit failures, couldn't admit when things went wrong. Every time he faced a difficult truth, he chose the easier lie. At first, those lies seemed harmless. Then they grew. Then they multiplied. Eventually, they became impossible to control. The promotion, hidden because he didn't want questions about where the extra income went. The secret account, created to separate money connected to old obligations. The constant claims that we were broke, a convenient way to avoid explaining missing funds. And Melissa, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. Why her? For the first time all evening, Daniel looked genuinely ashamed. According to him, the affair started during one of the most stressful periods of his life, not an excuse. Just an explanation. Instead of dealing with his problems honestly, he escaped into a fantasy. A relationship that required none of the difficult conversations waiting for him at home. Again, not an excuse. But unfortunately, it made sense. Bad decisions rarely arrive alone. They attract company. Then came the biggest twist of all, the one I never expected. Melissa knew about me, obviously, but she'd also discovered many of Daniel's financial secrets months earlier. According to Daniel, that was the source of their constant arguments. She wanted him to come clean, not because she was protecting me, because she was tired of being caught in the middle. Suddenly her message made perfect sense. "I'm tired of being blamed for things that started before I even met you." She wasn't talking about the affair. She was talking about the lies, the hidden debts, the financial chaos, the entire mess. At that point, I felt strangely calm. Not because I was okay, because I was exhausted. Months of questions had finally produced answers, painful answers, but answers. Then I asked the question that mattered most. What happens now? Daniel didn't have an immediate response. For once, there wasn't a prepared explanation, no carefully crafted excuse, just silence. And honestly, that silence told me more than any speech could, because the truth was simple. The affair could end, the debt could be repaid, the hidden account could be closed, the car could be sold, financial problems can be fixed. What neither of us knew was whether trust could be repaired. And that was the one problem money couldn't solve. The next morning, I made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a revenge plan, not a screaming confrontation, a decision. I packed a bag, booked a hotel, and left, not forever, not yet, but long enough to think clearly, long enough to figure out whether I was mourning a marriage, or simply mourning the version of it I thought existed. Because after everything I'd learned, one thing became painfully obvious. The biggest lie wasn't that we were broke. The biggest lie was that everything was fine. And once that illusion disappeared, there was no way to put it back. Not for either of us. The first night in the hotel felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, just quiet. For years, I'd been so busy managing everyday life that I never stopped to question the bigger picture. Now I had nothing but time. And unfortunately, time has a way of forcing uncomfortable thoughts to the surface. For the first few days, Daniel texted constantly. Apologies, explanations, promises. Some messages were thoughtful, some sounded rehearsed, most of them arrived too late. I wasn't interested in words anymore. I'd heard plenty of words. I wanted actions. Meanwhile, news of our separation spread faster than I expected. Apparently, family members had questions, friends had theories. And everyone suddenly became an expert on my marriage. Some urged reconciliation, others demanded divorce. A few somehow managed to blame me, which was honestly impressive considering I wasn't the one buying secret cars. Then came a surprise. Melissa contacted me directly. If you told me a month earlier that I'd willingly meet my husband's affair partner, I would have laughed. Yet there I was, sitting across from her in a coffee shop. The conversation was awkward for about 30 seconds. Then it became something else entirely, because Melissa wasn't what I expected. She wasn't arrogant, she wasn't dramatic, she wasn't trying to defend herself. If anything, she looked embarrassed. The first thing she said was, "I should have walked away sooner." That wasn't exactly the opening statement I expected. Over the next 2 hours, she told me her side of the story. According to her, Daniel initially presented himself as someone trapped in financial stress. A man carrying complicated obligations from his past. A man struggling to keep everything together. Sound familiar? Apparently, he used variations of the same story on everyone. Over time, Melissa discovered inconsistencies, then more inconsistencies, then entire sections of his life that didn't add up. By the time she learned the full truth, she was already emotionally involved. A terrible situation, but not the situation she'd signed up for. Then she revealed something surprising. The car wasn't actually her idea, not even close. According to Melissa, she'd repeatedly told Daniel not to buy it. The purchase wasn't a romantic gesture. It was guilt, pure guilt. Every time Daniel felt pressure from one secret, he'd try to compensate somewhere else. A gift, a promise, an expensive gesture, temporary solutions to permanent problems. It never worked, because guilt isn't a financial strategy, it's just another way to avoid accountability. The more she talked, the more one thing became obvious. Melissa wasn't the architect of the disaster. She was simply another person caught inside it. That didn't erase her choices, but it changed how I viewed the situation. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. She and Daniel hadn't spoken in weeks. The relationship was already over. Apparently, their final argument happened shortly before I discovered the hidden account, and according to her, it ended with a sentence she'd never forget. "You spend more time managing lies than fixing problems." Honestly, that might have been the most accurate thing anyone said during the entire ordeal. A few weeks later, Daniel and I finally met face to face. No lawyers, no family members, no audience, just us. The conversation was different this time, not because everything was fixed, because all the secrets were finally on the table. There was nothing left to hide, no mystery accounts, no unexplained payments, no surprise revelations, just consequences. Daniel admitted he spent years trying to preserve an image, the successful husband, the reliable provider, the man who always had everything under control. The problem was that image wasn't real, and maintaining it became more important than honesty. Every time reality threatened the image, he covered it up. One decision became another, then another, until eventually the lies required more effort than the truth would have required in the first place. Listening to him, I realized something. Most people imagine betrayals happen in a single moment, a dramatic event, one terrible choice. But that's not what happened here. This happened gradually, one shortcut, one omission, one excuse, repeated hundreds of times. The affair wasn't the beginning, it was the result, the final symptom of a much larger problem. Then came the hardest question of all. Could I trust him again? Not love. Trust. They're not the same thing. Love can survive disappointment. Trust is much harder. For months, I genuinely didn't know the answer, so I stopped forcing one. Instead of deciding our future immediately, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I returned to hobbies I'd abandoned, reconnected with friends, made financial plans independently. For the first time in years, I stopped organizing my future around someone else's decisions. And something unexpected happened. I started feeling stronger, not because the situation improved, because I learned I could handle it. Then, almost a year after everything exploded, Daniel did something that finally got my attention. Nothing dramatic, no grand gesture, no expensive gift, no emotional speech. He simply showed consistency. Month after month, no shortcuts, no excuses, no hidden surprises, just consistent effort. Ironically, it was the least exciting thing he'd done in years. And it mattered more than all the dramatic promises combined. Eventually, we reached a crossroads. The question wasn't whether the past happened. It did. The question wasn't whether damage existed. It did. The question was whether two people could build something new after the old version collapsed. And honestly, that's a question nobody else can answer for you, not friends, not family, not strangers online, only the people living it. People always ask how the story ends. They expect certainty, a perfect ending. A perfect breakup, a perfect reconciliation. Life rarely works that way. What I can say is this: the affair ended. The hidden accounts disappeared, the debts were resolved, the car was sold, the secrets stopped. And for the first time in years, the truth became easier than the lies. Whether that was enough to save the marriage is a different question, but it was enough to finally give us a choice. And after everything that happened, having an honest choice felt like the one thing I'd been missing all along. Because losing money hurts, discovering betrayal hurts, but living inside someone else's deception, that costs far more than either. The moment the truth finally arrived, painful as it was, I stopped living in a story someone else created and started writing my own.